Thank you very much. I wanted tonight, I wanted to review all of the previous lectures, and we're not going to be here forever. I want to go over briefly what I've already said and go to tonight's lecture, because I have said some things which might be misunderstood, because I have dealt with some old things that you need to think about. And I have dealt with some old religions that are not old in the sense. And I want you to understand something about history, is that history is not as old as you think, because all history is a current event. And every current event is a part of history. And I have dealt with old religions, but what I have dealt with is religions that came before man called them religions. I have dealt with great river civilizations and early man's spirituality, because what you have today that you call religions are carbon copies of original spirituality. And I have dealt with the original copy where your carbon copies came from. And the early Africans, in building great river civilizations, built a concept which they did not call religion, though your religions came out of them. They called it spirituality. And what they created was a concept of a force of the universe that was much larger than denominations, much larger than the one-dimensional things that eventually man called religions. I had gone beyond the narrow concepts that we live under right now. And it is difficult for you to understand that that age was man's highest spiritual and moral age. And that in seizing upon this age, mostly by foreigners who did not understand the original African creation, the spirituality of man regressed and did not leap forward, but regressed. They organized it into pockets and gave it names. But before the African gave it a name, but practiced it as a great force of the universe, it was then when it had its greatest value. And foreigners picked out of it little pieces and departmentalized it into religious pockets and started war between one pocket and another, then broke the pockets down into something called denominations, then started war between one denomination and the other, and they did service to the spirituality that the Africans created in the great river civilization, starting with the Nile, continue with the Niger, the Volta, the Limpopo, in the Zimbabwe, in the Congo. The Africans created a great spiritual force of the universe. And all of this is misinterpreted so tragically in the TV series, The Africans, by Ali Mazrui, who's running one of the most unique con games for Islam since the Prophet Muhammad. He's running a better con game for Islam than the Europeans ran for Christianity. For beneath all of it, he is saying that Africa waited in darkness for Islam to bring the light. He's giving you a few good things in order to slip in his game. And you have to know a lot of African history to understand his omissions. And because you do not know general African history, you do not know his omissions. It is in his omissions that he's doing the greatest amount of damage. And you have the illusion that you are getting African history. Because he'll say a few good things that you will agree with and feel good about. Then he'll slip in the damaging things that you won't know how to deal with. And because you do not understand how games are played in our time, you won't examine who's financing it and ask some questions. Why would the Annenberg Trust finance a series narrated by a half Arab? Why haven't we asked some questions? Somebody is buying friendships at our expense. Why we have so few friends in the world? I have said long ago, it wouldn't be surprised to see certain people in the same political bed against us. It wouldn't be surprised to see any people in the same political bed against us, because there's a political naivete that appeared in our history 1680 BC that we haven't dealt with to this very day. And every time people unite against us, we haven't been able to deal with it because we assume that this kind of thing won't happen to us because decent people don't do this kind of thing, and we don't know, we can't separate what is and what is not in this regard. Now let us look at what has gone on before what I have said and why I have said these things. In the first session, in dealing with religions and history before the Christian era, I was trying to deal with that history in Africa that developed before the Christian era, and I was trying to deal with pre-God religions and pre-God spiritual. When I say pre-God religions, and I am not talking about an age of godlessness, and I'm not talking about an age of sinfulness and an age of degradation. This was one of the greatest ages of spirituality known in the history of the world. It was probably one of the highest moral ages known to man. And man did not use the word God at all. And I'm not talking about a godless age. I am talking about an age when man accepted a spiritual force of the universe so all-conclusive that it included everything. And man did not say only man has a soul. He said all living things has a soul, including the cockroach. And he wouldn't step on a cockroach because a cockroach has a soul. And he wouldn't cut down a tree without a ceremony because a tree has life and a tree has a soul. Western man began the stupid concept that only human beings have soul. Western man, in his soullessness, began the concept that only certain people with certain faces and certain color has soul. Western man is the only one that began to make a virtue out of a physical defect, the lack of color. And to make you feel ashamed out of the great virtue of having color. And you do not understand to this day the envy that people have of you because you have color. You are the most beautiful people on camera or walking down the street that God ever created. And yet, he has trained you to apologize for having it. Train you to cringe and to look for his chemicals to put on your face to try to take it off. Now, 3,000 or 4,000 years before he wore a shoe or lived in a house that had a window, when you didn't have this nonsense in your mind, you hadn't come in contact with him at all, nor had you come in contact with the Asians when you had your own spirituality intact, when he hadn't interfered with your culture, or you, when you didn't know of his existence, you, meaning African people, had created a spirituality that said every living thing has a soul, including a tree, including a cockroach. And this form of spirituality included everything and included a law, the law of opposites, which to simplify it was the law of complementary, that you complemented everything, that if you had a female, you got to have a male or vice versa. And so you did not ever get into the stupidity of debating the equality of man and woman, because if you couldn't have one without the other. And so Africans never would debate the equality of a man and a woman, because it is almost asking whether your mother was your equal. And how would you debate anything as stupid as that? Because if it wasn't for your mother, you wouldn't be here. How silly would such a debate be? So you never got into that. It was out of this kind of atmosphere of spirituality that the Africans created not only the matrilineal system where the lineage in the family came down to the female, but where he created the world's first female god. Whether Europeans didn't do it then, don't do it now. But the European had an argument from the beginning as to whether he could accept her, and made her a beast of burden from the beginning. But when the Africans, if he had any debate, it was not whether she was an equal, but whether she, the mother, the giver of life, the sustainer of life, would accept him, not whether he would accept her. And for the most logical thing was to make her one of the first deities in human history. What I'm saying is that he laid the basis for basic humanity and the basic laws of the universe. And when I went to Africa in the rise of Christianity, I was not talking about Western Christianity. I separate Western Christianity from African Christianity altogether, because Western Christianity was and still is a European concoction and a misunderstanding of the elements that the European extracted from Africa to make his concept of Christianity. Because the European extracted from Africa concepts of Christianity which he never understood. And he created an imbalance in the Christian faith that still exists, because the Africans never had any inequality. Now let's go back to the visitors to Africa who did not understand the African concept. The Hebrews didn't understand what the Africans were saying then and don't understand it now. When they visited Africa and began to copy African folklore and began to personify that folklore as part of their story, they began to misunderstand that folklore. And when they, having dwelled in Africa, seeing African stories, began to read themselves into these stories. And when an African prince, Moses, got into difficulty with the royal family, having assaulted the Pharaoh's messenger, got into some difficulty, took up with them, then said to them, if you obey my God, I'll be your leader. Then extracted 10 laws from some African laws that were 2,000 years old before they arrived. And all he did is to extract them from the negative confessions and turn the language around. He could palm these laws off on them, but he could never palm these off on the Africans, because the Africans had them all along. The negative confessions were old in Africa. These were the confessions from the school, from the mystery school in the Great Lodge at Luxor. After you finish your training, you stand before your masters and recite these confessions. I have not been guilty of murder. I have not been guilty of violating my neighbor's wife. It's 42. And all Moses did to extract 10 and give it to them, and they thought he's giving us a law. He was giving them something. If he took 10 commandments, brought 10 from the hill, then he took 10 up there with him, because they were in existence all along. It might have been one of the most unique spiritual con games of history. But now, he could never have sold these laws to Africans because the Africans had them all along. And they publicized to the world that they gave the word monotheism. But then some people said, Akhenaten gave the word monotheism. Neither Akhenaten or the Jews gave the word monotheism. The African had a concept of an all-conclusive God all along. But they didn't call it God. They call it a spiritual force of the universe that looked over everybody and all living things. So Moses could sell this idea to foreigners, the Hebrews. He could never sell this to Africans, because the Africans knew better, and they had a concept of God much higher than the oneness, because their God was larger in contact, and their spirituality was larger. And these golden calf worshippers could buy this, but the African wouldn't buy it in any case. And they would copy African folklore and make out of it a religion. And subsequently, they would sell a lesser concept, but the broader concept continued with the Africans. But the inability, but the Africans many times would buy one concept, but the European would buy another concept. This is why when you go to a white church today and go to a black church, you go into two different religions and two different kinds of spirituality. Now, there wasn't enough time to explain this because both of these people are on two spiritual wavelengths, because they have two different spiritualities. But the Christian story is basically an African story. It's basically an Egyptian story. It's basically the story of Cush, the Punt. Basically the story of people going into Egypt, extracting wisdom from Egypt. And when the story is told of the religions of the world, all of the elements, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, would come out of Africa in the first place. Now, in the lecture on the rise of Islam, what I did not emphasize is the great heroes of Islam: Zayd bin Harith, Bilal, and Anta, a great warrior of Islam, and who, after the Arabs began their internal descent, he called the prayers only twice after the death of Muhammad, and he refused to take the mantle of leadership after the death of Muhammad, who asked him to be the first caliph after Muhammad. It would have been a different kind of religion. And the role that he could have played, and the role that Africans did play after the death of Muhammad, is generally left out of the history of that religion. And this is why it touches me with a bit of anger that many brothers enter the religion almost apologetically, as though it's the Arab's personal property, not knowing that the Arab is the most corrupt element within that religion, and that this is a great religion, and that Africans laid the foundation for it and should claim it, reform it, and make it the religion that it still can be, though it is the least original of the world's religions. But the brothers failed to understand the role of Zayd bin Harith the role of Bilal, the role of Anta, the role of Khufu the Magnificent, the role of even contemporary Africans in the religion, the role of Askia the Great and other Africans of that faith who took it into the Western Sudan, the role of Tariq bin Zad, who took it into Spain, the role of Abu Bakr, who took it into the Western Sudan, and the good and the bad that they have done. Once we understand that and understand that there was a black side to the religion and an Arab side, and that there was both good and bad, but the reform side and the revolutionary side came from the African side. At the last lecture, we were dealing with the empire of Mali, empire of Ghana. And where we left the lecture, it was the entry of Songhai when Mansa Musa had taken 2 hostages from Songhai, and this was after the death of Mansa Musa, Ali Colon, and Suleiman Nair. Principally Ali Colon had discovered that the Mali Empire was weak, and that having grown weak, he rode close to his country and got across the news that it was time for his country to free itself from the domination of Mali. And when he rode across, he was proclaimed liberator, which means Sony, the liberator. And this, the emergence of the first Sony Ali the first. This is 1335. Now we are looking at Songhai, the last of the great African empires. And this empire would eventually consist of all of the land area that used to be Ghana, used to be Mali, and it would be eventually larger than the continental limits of the United States. But let us look at Mali's last days, called the Melestine. In its last days, after the death of the great Mansa Musa, who went on his famous journey to Mecca and Medina, taken from 60 to 100,000 people, even 50 royal hairdressers, and he only had his favorite wives. He is dead now. This is after 1335. We are dealing with the years between 1335 and the rise of the second Sony Ali, but we're dealing with Mali's last years. A famous traveler comes to Mali in the 1350s. His name is Ibn Battuta. He has traveled over most of the world of that day. He has been in China. He has been in India. He is a Tunisian. He did not want to go down into what he called the Balad as-Sudan, or the land of the blacks. He is a devout Muslim, and he is pro-Muslim. He he has no particular interest in going into the land of the blacks. This is what he calls it. But once he is there, he is interested in to what extent they are good Muslims. And he sees the women having freedom that women are not allowed to have in North Africa. And he sees women going around with no veils. And he wanted to know whether they are good Muslims. And he's told they're good Muslims, as good as any. And he wanted to know why they have so much freedom. And he's told that here a woman can be a good Muslim and be boss of the marketplace all at the same time. Then he asked the kings, there's a woman down there arguing right under your window. And he said, that's my sister, and she's arguing with one of her workers. He's supposed to, she gave him something to do, and anyway, he's been selling something, and he's got the returns from the sales, and she's of the opinion that she's been cheated. And that's what the argument is about. And so he's beginning to learn that women in this part of Africa exercise a sense of freedom. And this was the beginning. He did not discover this until later, of a market women's society in West Africa that exists to this very day, the Sandy Society. And this Sandy Society among market women in West Africa is a court in itself. And it is so strong that these women can put you on trial and punish you, and you never know how it was done or who did it. And right now, some of them are millionaires. Right now. And they are Muslim. They wear no veil, and they control the marketplace. They control imports and exports and funds, fabulous funds. And they don't have to bow and scrape, and they hire men and sell them and dismiss them at will. And they got no movement because they were born liberated. And that's not anything that they argue about. I'm saying that this existed in the 1300s. And to some extent it still exists. Now, why do you have this in West Africa and don't have it in East Africa? Because West Africa was Islamized by Islamized blacks, and East Africa was Islamized by Arabs. There's a world of difference. The blacks who Islamized West Africa knew what customs not to tamper with. The Arabs didn't know then, don't know now. You have to understand the difference between who Islamizes different parts of Africa. And this is why the African side of Islam had one projection and the Arab side had another projection. The male chauvinism of the Arabs didn't reach as far, or didn't touch West Africa quite the same way it touched East Africa. All right, now, Ibn Battuta would record all of this, and it is in the Broadway series of his book, The Travels of Ibn Battuta. It can be found in other works because Italian kings, anxious to know something about inner West Africa, commissioned books to be written about inner West Africa. One was a king named Raja, who commissioned an Arab named Il-Fazan to write a book, and this book is called The Book of Raja. And another king commissioned another Arab, Ilamare, and he wrote a book especially for that king called Roads and Ruins, a very good history of inner West Africa, taking in Mali and taking in action the last of Ghana. All right, now let's go back and see what did this first Songhai Ali do. This first Songhai Ali began to consolidate the country. We're dealing with the years between 1335 and the emergence of the second Songhai Ali, 1464. 1464, his reign is 1464. Here is his ending date, 1492. That's the era of the second Songhai Ali. All right, 1464, the second Songhai Ali, the greatest one, comes to power. And what will he do? He would first free the city of Timbuktu of a bunch of marauders, thieves, fine warriors, still troublemakers in West Africa, called Tuaregs. A mixed breed of people who wore veils, who wore blue cloth with veils, called the people of the veil. Here's where the men wore the veil, not the women, called Tuaregs. They fight well. They don't know a single thing about ruling a city, but they know a lot about wrecking cities. Bunch of thugs, still a bunch of thugs. People go in West Africa, oh, how colorful they are in their blue clothes. And people don't know nothing about the ancient history of them. Never done anything right, but tear things down, but never know how to put anything together. He drove them out of Timbuktu and freed the city of the wreckage of the Tuaregs. And they began to consolidate the land area and to bring the pieces of the empire together. A master engineer, he began to build a 250-mile canal, pulling the empire, connecting various parts of the empire. A great administrator, but not as great as the one who's going to come after him. He's going to have difficulty with the imams, the old Muslim ministers, because he's a Fulo. And he belonged to the indigenous African religion of his mother, who came from what is now northern Nigeria. They wanted to know why he will not practice the Muslim faith. He won't practice it because he don't believe in it. And because sometimes they said, well, this is a Muslim country. It's not a Muslim country. The royal family is Muslim, but he's not Muslim. So he gets up in the morning and he announces the 5 prayers of the day. Instead of praying, he announces all the prayers at once and said that I'm busy today. I won't have time to pray to you all. I got other work to do. And finally, the imams come to him and tell him that it's bad for the state that our emperor will not say the prayers. He says, all right, I'll say the prayers. And so they go to the mosque, sneak in and watch him. He say one prayer, as he leans up, and he turns to his minister of state and gives orders. And he turns over here and gives orders. He ain't saying the prayers, he's mocking the prayers. He's doing the work of the state. It's our emperor's a barbarian. Then when they get on him again, he exiled them to the desert. Get out of here, you're interfering with the state. Then the imams turned to a devout Muslim, Muhammad Ituri, a commoner, the only one who can control the ferocious temper of Songhai Ali. So he calms him down and sends the imams out into the desert. So you go out in the desert and change clothes or horses and come on back. And He's so busy he won't even notice. He don't know one from another anyway. And that's what they do. That calms him down. Finally, when they aggravate him again, he says, "Somebody go out there and kill him." You know. So they're not killed. He's busy. He's building his famous canal from Walata to all the way to Timbuktu, and he's building 150 miles. And then he stops to fight a minor war in the south with the Musi people who used to control ancient Ghana. And on his way home, his horse got his feet entangled in underbrush crossing a minor stream, and he falls off the horse and he's killed. He's drowned. An inglorious death. For one of the great men born in Africa in the last 2,000 years, Songhai Ba, a great militarist, a great consolidator of state. Now a year passed, the fight for the throne. The Imams now backs the commoner, Muhammad Ituri. After a year and support from the Muslims, he comes to power. And on his way to his inauguration, the dethroned brother, the sister of the dethroned of the brother that he pushed from the throne, looks at Muhammad Ituri riding to his inauguration. From the balcony, she shouts out, "Say it is not he, say he has not done this to my brother." Then she shouts out a curse word, "Throne stealer, usurper, thief, ash slayer." He stops and pauses for a while and said that, "I will not let the wailings of this sick woman disturb me. Henceforth, this is the name of my dynasty. Call me throne stealer, usurper, thief, Ashler." And he created what is known as the Ashler dynasty. And he is known in history as Muhammad Ashler the Great. He earned the name and he earned the title. And historians call him the greatest civil administrator of all time. He comes to power. He consolidates all the land area of the country. It is so large that it takes you 6 months to ride over the kingdom. He is a great administrator. Now this is worth emphasizing, because if you can't administer a country, there's no point of having it. He has been prime minister and head of the army for 30 years. So he knows administration. He began to reform the country, weights in the measures. He's also preparing for a trip to Mecca and Medina. He is training people. He is developing a professional army so that professional soldiers can do work, and you don't have to call on farmers to do it. Ambassadors are coming from different parts of North Africa and Southern Europe. Ambassadors from Spain. That comes into his court. An ambassador from Tunisia and Spain. And a young man who was later be called Leo Africus. And on his way back to Spain, he is captured by Christian pirates. Remember, in the Mediterranean, Christians were capturing Arabs and Arabs were capturing Christians. And he was captured by Christian pirates, and he was so intelligent, they gave him as a present to Pope Leo. And that's why he got the name Leo's African. Leo's African. And he's known as Leo Africanus. The Pope hired him to write a history of the Western Sudan. And he wrote a history of what was happening in Songhai. And except for having the rivers running the wrong way, it was a pretty good history. called A History and Description of Africa. And he introduced the glory of Africa to the Europe of that day. It was great ambassadors, a great state. He described the University of Timbuktu, the University of Sankore at Timbuktu, and its great scholars. He described the emperor and what he was doing for the university, endowing great chairs. He described the fact that the universities and the scholars were so great that many times Arabs came to the university to get jobs, but they weren't even qualified. The great masters at the university could teach 10 subjects and teach them well. And the Arabs wasn't even qualified to teach such subjects. This was medieval Africa at its best and at its height, while Europe was rehearsing to go into the slave trade. These Africans were burning and moving. This was Africa taking her last great walk in the sun. Now you can understand why all of this is left out of history. Because when people want to conquer you, they destroy your confidence and your historical memory. They don't want you to believe in this. They don't want you to know when you manage nations, big nations, as big as the United States, and did it exceptionally well. The mayor of Timbuktu was mayor 50 years, Henrik Clarke. And had to beg for relief. After 50 years, he begged to be relieved from his job. So, anytime you find that kind of stability, man, I've been mayor 50 years, please let me out of the job. So nobody's content, nobody's running for the office, nobody trying to take it away from him. That's stability. Nobody else wants the job. You're doing a good job, stay there. That was Timbuktu. That was Songhai at his greatest. Now, he would go on a trip to Mecca and Medina. He would not take 100,000 people like Mansa Musa, just 10,000. And only people who could learn from the trip, mayors of cities. He would study taxation. He would study administration. Then he would hold classes. What did you learn? What did you learn about city administration? What did you learn when you passed through the city, when you passed through different people in their respective countries? He would be declared Grand Caliph of the Western Sudan when he would return. Then when he would return, he would issue his famous proclamation. Except for the reckless darings of Songhai, the empire of Songhai would have spread itself to the border of the Great Sea. This is now the burden and sworn duty of Abu Bakr, Muhammad Askari the Great. Each man to his task and his craft, women to bear more sons for the glory of our empire, soldiers to the field of battle. You see, in Jinnah and Timbuktu, he called the scholars together. He created a classification system now used in the army. He disguised himself as a common man and went into the marketplace to make sure that the common man got his full worth for his dollar, for what he paid for. And the people were making so sure that they gave each person his full measure. So each time you bought something, they gave you your full measure and a little bit over, called the dash. Is the origin of the tip. what you got coming in a little bit over. Today in West Africa, that's known as the dash. A little dash over. He created a professional army. He created a concept of warfare from land to sea, from sea to land, that developed in amphibian warfare. The Germans studied his concept of warfare and developed it into integrated into modern warfare. Henrik Clarke, in his work, Travels and Discoveries in North and in Central Africa, is the one that called him the greatest civil administrator of all times. Lady Lugard, in her work, A Tropical Dependency, said he was the captain of warfare standing at the crossroads of history, and she said that no human being of the 15th and the 16th century came near him as an administrator of state. For 20 years, he reigned supreme. The last 10 years of his reign, he was blind. And only 3 people knew it. And he disguised this blindness, and 3 confidants schooled him so uniquely. When he called court, they would go out a half hour and pick up all the gossip and find out who's wearing what color and who's been to where. And he would come out and he would walk so gingerly to the throne and walk to the edge of the throne room and look over his head and compliment somebody wearing blue, compliment somebody wearing a different color, and everybody would think he could see. And would gossip about who's got a new wife, and you couldn't, you would die with as soon as that was a blind man. And finally, he was a little over 80, and he had 50 sons over 50. And they thought they would never come to power, so he was overthrown by one of the sons, and a cousin overthrew the son. Then he was in an island in the Niger, and then he sent for the weakest son he had. And that was a son, not from one of his strategic marriages, because every time he conquered a country, he would marry into the country, and they'll always begot a son. How he managed that, I don't know, but that he did. But he was riding through the old kingdom of Naana, and he saw a girl. This wasn't a strategic marriage. He just liked what he saw, and she liked what she saw, and they got together. So this was the son from that marriage. He always called this child his love child. And this son was pampered and weakling and grew up near the palace. He wasn't trained to fight, and so that's the son he sent for. And the son wanted to know his father, why did you send for the least of your sons? Why did you send for me? He said, I'll tell you what to do. He said, I'm weak, I don't know nothing, I don't know how to do nothing. He said, I'll tell you what to do. But while he was in Egypt, he studied taxation, and he made a decision. I will tax the conquered people no more than I tax the people of Songhai. And he had treated the colonies so well. It was the colonies of Songhai that came to his defense and liberated him and restored him to power. He came to power briefly and put the son on the throne. But the son just couldn't bring it off physically. He lasted only 3 years. And part of the folklore is that there was an old lady who was once one of his sweethearts in the early days, and she said that she refused to die until she see her emperor one more time. And when she saw him riding in splendor on his way back to the palace, she smiled and laid down and died right in the parade room. That was enough for her. That's the folklore. I don't know. Folklore don't have to be true. But after his death, the sons came together, calmed down, because there was some more trouble brewing. And that trouble was coming from North Africa. Now you're going to see one of the great tragedies in the history of Africa. Muslim turning on Muslim. The North Africans, now expelled from Spain, having lost power in the Mediterranean. The Portuguese hadn't taken a small part of Morocco, a little kingdom called Cetra. Europe is getting its courage back again. The maps of the Jewish merchants who were doing trade in the Mediterranean and in inner West Africa having fallen into the hands of Henry the Navigator, who never went to sea, but be that as it may. Prince Henry has started a school of training chart makers and navigators, and a young man named Christopher Colon, later called Christopher Columbus, had gone to the same school. He says in his diary, boy, I sailed up and down in 3 years. Europe is awakening now from its long sleep and its lethargy of the Middle Ages. It has come out of its long sleep, but it has come ridden by famines and plagues. It is people poor, land poor, and resource poor. It is hungry, it's looking for something. It has lost all of its sentimental attachment to itself. It has lost its sentimental attachment to the world. It never was Christian and is not even Christian now. It has no Christian sentiment. It has Christian form, but no Christian substance. Hasn't got it now. But it uses the framework to do its dirty work. Europe is getting ready. But Africa is unprepared to deal with that mentality then, unprepared to deal with it now. All right. But the Muslims in North Africa have no respect for the Muslims in inner West Africa. So they are planning to take the gold in the salt in inner West Africa. So now, with Askir gone, with the strength of the West African kingdom, a little week after the death of Askir, the Moroccans send a note to the then king of Songhai, Assak, saying, stop digging gold at the mines at Tagaza, the great salt mine. Salt is so precious that you gave 2 parts gold for 1 part salt. Salt is more precious than gold. And so Assak is sarcastic when he gets the letter. He said, I don't know what Assak this letter is addressed to, because I will not give up 1 inch of the soil of Songhai. And that whoever Assak you mean is surely not I. And he sends a letter back, and he sends them presents, and he sends them more elaborate presents. They couldn't bribe him. So now 50 years pass, but the Moroccans are planning to take that country. Then 1590, a letter is discovered. I have the letter in my file. The letter is from Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth I of England, Henry VIII's daughter, only daughter. And the letter is an apology from Ilman Su, a black emperor of Morocco, apologizing to Elizabeth for not answering her previous letter. He said he's been busy planning the conquest of Songhai. Then she sends him a letter that if you help me in overthrowing Antonio of Spain, I will give you the ammunition you need to conquer Songhai. Now you see a black emperor getting ammunition from a white queen to conquer a black country. You see, the Arab was no respecter. You see, the North Africa, the Arab, turning toward Europe, to get weapons to conquer the blacks in the South. No respecter of kith and kin, violating the basic rule that governs Islam, is that no Islamic brother should ever lift arms against another. You see him violating it then, and may do it again, right now. Watch as well as pray. Remember, history serves you a purpose only to the extent that you can protect yourself today by learning what happened yesterday. Watch that North African now and what he may do. Watch what's happening in Chad. Listen but watch. Why is Gaddafi in Chad right now? Ask some questions. All right, now, things would go on. This is 1590. 1591, Il-Mansur finds a leader from Spain named Jetta to head the army, mostly European mercenaries. These European mercenaries handled the European guns of that day. Jetta, for some reason, which I can't explain, I don't know what this has to do with it, becomes a Muslim and permits himself to be emasculated. Why? What's that got to do with it? I don't know. Why he becomes a unit, I don't know. But he does. And he pledges loyalty to Il-Mansur. And he leads the army across the Sahara. When he leads the army across the Sahara, because a trader from the house of Songhai in Africa betrays in Africa. If you understand, if I say an African Benedict Arnold, you'll understand what I'm talking about. We produce those two. Angry because he's not promoted to some kind of royal business. And he lets them know that if an army could come across the Sahara in a zigzag way, it could hit a water hole every third day, and it could survive. Now, the Moroccans know how to get across that sand. And Jetta leads the army almost to the edge of Songhai, and the people in the desert gets home and tells the emperor, if you would just send somebody to cover up the water holes, maybe they could perish before they get to Songhai. No, he says, there's only 15,000 of them, and he sends 40,000 out there to stop them. That should be enough. But he hadn't figured on one thing. They've got firearms. Firearms that has never been seen in this part of the world. And the bravery of his soldiers, not enough. So they try a trick that it always worked. They would stampede great herds of cattle into the enemy's lines. Then they would move in and knock him off. They get the cows ready, right in front of the lines. It's a cloudy day and a clap of thunder. The dumb cows turn in the wrong direction. The moral of the story is, well, you don't give an assignment to a dumb cow. The cow destroyed the wrong army. The men got slaughtered. That army moved into Songhai. And what did they destroy first? The people? No. People people destroy first those things that make you feel good about yourself. The University of Songhai, the great temples, the great structures, the scholars, the beautiful things in the country. One general pulled his army out of Timbuktu, Ashley Nur. He pulled them to a place called Sagu in what is present-day Nigeria. Fought for almost 20 years, in and out. Gave the Moroccans a fit till they sent another general named Iswag. Long time. Now, they moved into the city 1494. They exiled most of the great scholars, including the supreme scholar of the Western Sudan, Ahmed Baba. Ahmed Baba had written 47 books, each on a separate subject, including a book on Arab grammar, still in existence. Many of these African Muslims ran to the army, shouting, "We are your co-religionists, we are your brothers in religion," and they got slaughtered. Muslim against Muslim. Now you can understand why I lose a little patience when the brothers tell me, you know, get all excited about Islam. You got to study its crimes as well as its virtue. Ahmed Baba did the same. Ahmed Baba had a personal library of 2,000 books, each on a separate subject. This is the greatest Muslim scholar of the late medieval world. His work has been solicited in Europe, all over North Africa. A lot of his books were lost in the expatriation across the desert. And when he arrived in Morocco, the students thought that the great scholar had at last come to lecture. They bowed before his horse or his camel. "Bless the wind that blew you here. Oh, great messenger, oh, great master, lend us of your wisdom. Allah must be kind to us at last to send you to the doors of our city." Then he had to tell them, "I'm a prisoner, I'm not a visiting scholar." When they tried to lift him from his horse, they understood that his leg was broken. They took him to the podium of the great university, and he couldn't stand. They took him to the emperor, Il-Mansur. The emperor felt so ashamed he wouldn't even face him. He talked to him from behind a screen. And the emperor told him a lie, "I'm trying to unite Islam." He said, "Well, why don't you talk to the Turcos? They are Muslims and they're fighting Muslims all the time. Why don't you unite them?" He stayed in Morocco. At least he was in prison in Morocco until 1611. And when he came back, he was permitted to go home. The young prince that welcomed him there was now on the throne. And he records it. He said that when he bid goodbye, he called him father. When I tried to bid goodbye to my father, I mean father in religion, when a person is elder in your same religion, you refer to him as father. When I tried to bid goodbye to my father, he would not touch my hand. And as his horse turned northward, southward to go home, he would not even look back to see me crying. He was saying goodbye to the great Ahmed Baba. Ahmed Baba had written 2 books while he was in Morocco, trying to explain his country to those Moroccans, Ibtaj and Mizrael. And today in Morocco, they found the greatest collection of his books, 36 of his 49 books. And it's lined up University of Fez, the works of the great Moroccan writer, Ahmed Bab. They stole him from you. And if you don't know, you don't know. Now, those Moroccans married African women, and that's called the dynasty of the Ahmads. And they start fighting among themselves and wrecked what was left of the Western Sudan. They wrecked Timbuktu. And when the French moved into this area, they assumed that nothing great had ever happened in this part of Africa. But when you look at Songhai, what it was and what it was great, this was Africa's last great walk in the sun. After the decline of Nile Valley civilization, the retreat of Rome, the fall of the Roman Empire, African genius in state building was reborn in the Western Sudan, and it lasted for 1,000 years or more. And Africans brought into being 3 great states, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. And it was after the breaking up of these states that and the irony of it all, that the last 200 years of the state of Songhai were the first 200 years of the slave trade. And that after this, the difficult part of the slave trade spread inland. But the years of Songhai was Africa's last great walk in the sun. And what they want to take away from you was the confidence that you built a great state, and the memory, the historical memory, that if you did it once, of course you will do it again.
Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Beautiful. Brother Simmons, could you turn this back?
I'd like to thank you, Dr. Clarke, for always an informative lecture. My question is, with the basic condition that the world is in today and the constant erosion of the African population, both here and on the continent, with AIDS, famine, drugs, and what have you, do you believe that Africa will once again have another great walk in the sun? And if it is to have another great walk in the sun, how can we as Africans on this side of the world help to facilitate it as best as possible?
I think Africa is everywhere African people are. And I think you can help Africa by getting yourself together wherever you are, by being a better African person and a better African human being, and realize that you contribute to Africa by contributing to the betterment of yourself wherever you are on the face of the earth, and realize that all of us are African people, and we have to start coming together as African people. And the African nation, away from Africa, owe Africa something, and maybe the best we can do for Africa is the betterment of ourselves. Yes, sir.
Dr. Clarke, thanks again for all the information and good evening. The last time we met, you referred to the Europeans' religion as Christendom as compared to Christianity. What is Christendom?
Christendom is a political instrument. Christendom is the exploitation of the idea of Christianity, is the usury of Christianity as against the practice of Christianity. And this concept of the usury of Christianity, in my idea, started with the Romans in the Roman Empire that used it politically and did not practice it. I do not believe the European personality is suited for Christianity.
Peace and blessings be upon you, Dr. Clarke.
Yeah.
What I want to ask you was in regards to tribes in Africa that trace their ancestry to Israelite tribes. And one particular tribe called the Enidin.
The what now?
The Enidin, which is a artisan and blacksmith tribe under of the Tuareg, called the Enidin, and they claim that they are descendants of, they're Muslim now, but they claim to be descendants of our Lord King David. And there's also other tribes that say they came from Mesopotamia. And I was reading recently of some literature saying that the Assyrian captivity of the Israelites, after they was released from that captivity, many of them went into Northwest Africa. And also in the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, many of them came into West Africa. I want to ask you, to what extent is that true? And I want to ask you, to what extent is that true that many tribes there trace their ancestry to Israel, being Israelites?
It is, to a great extent, it is true if you are willing to concede something which the present-day Jew is not willing to concede. That it is true of the Eastern Jew, it is not true of the European Jew. And that the European Jew is a separate ethnic entity. After the scattering of the Jews by the Romans, many Jews did go down into Africa and live and stayed there and integrated into Africans and didn't come out. There's a book called Hebrewisms of West Africa that points to some of this information. There's some other books that point to this information. And there's a migration of Jews into East Africa, and we can't discard the Solomon story and the number of Jews that came into Africa as missionaries after the Queen of Sheba story. If you can recognize the fact that these Jews in Africa who claim descent from the ancient Jews have no direct relationship to the European Jews, I can accept that. But if you say that these Jews and the European Jews are relatives, then I cannot accept that at all. But you have to accept the difference between someone who belongs to the Hebrew faith and someone who's relatives of the European Jews. Yes, sir.
I just share everybody's gratitude after having heard what you communicated and shared with us, so thank you again. My question is a theological question, and it goes back to some of what you had said about the taking of the negative confessions and their transmutation into this thing called the Ten Commandments. If black people adhere to Christianity and are trying to have a love of Jesus Christ or a love of the message of Christ, but want to break away from the false history and the historical lies of the European, could you suggest some ways for African American Christians who are sincere about their faith but want to also seek truth to study some things that will give them a further rooting in the African history of what is now Christianity versus the Europeanized version that we get through most of Western religion? What can we do to begin to study and do that?
They can study some of the ancient texts and study some of the basis of the ancient texts. They can study some of the Egyptian texts. Now that we've got people who can translate some of the original texts that went into the making of the Bible, we've got people who can study those original texts as against the interpretation of the text. Study some of the original texts.
Do you know how we can get a hold of some of that?
Well,
In English, or whatever language?
There's a group of people in Chicago now, J. Carruthers and Rickety Wimby. These are some of the Black American translators now who are beginning to translate some of the original Egyptian texts. Karinga's little work, The Hosea, is beginning to translate a direct translation from the old text. And I'm saying that the ancient spirituality is now coming through from our point of view. And we can study our spirituality from its original base as against European interpretations of it. We don't have to become less spiritual. In fact, we can even be more, because our spiritual base is much broader than we thought it was.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'd like to know, what do a Kennington have to do with Christianity?
What does what?
What do a Kennington have to do with Christianity?
What does what? I didn't get one word.
A Kennington.
I missed one word. Akhenaten. Oh, good. Akhenaten was a credit for giving the world the concept of the oneness of God. That's a misinterpretation of what Akhenaten did. In all truthfulness, Akhenaten dealt with the corrupt priesthood of his day. And Akhenaten told the world of that day, because the priests were corrupt and was telling people that you can't go to different places because you no longer have any protection. Akhenaten said that God is everywhere. And said that you could go any place you want because God will go with you. He is all omnipotent, he's all powerful, and he goes everywhere. And so the concept of the all-seeing, all-traveling God got across. And a lot of people think he gave the world the oneness of God, but the oneness of God was there all along. But he merely he brought them back. He didn't give the world the oneness of God. He merely brought them back to the oneness of God. They had forgotten the concept. He brought them back to the concept of the oneness of God and made them realize the oneness of God. And out of that oneness came the oneness that went into the making of Christianity. And he gave the world a whole concept of love of people. And he was worshipped as a God of peace. He thought so much of life he would not crush a flower.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a two-part question. Perhaps you could explain the broken noses on the Sphinx and other African monoliths, and also kind of a different question, the significance of the Battle of Tours. The Battle of Tours.
The Battle of Tours?
Yeah, with Charles Martel.
Oh, yes. All right. The broken nose of the Sphinx is because the noses of people and the lips of people, more than any other part of the face, tells you ethnically who they belong to.
Right.
You can't debate, once you look at the nose and the lips, you can't debate
right.
who he is,
Yes.
you know that's one of your children.
Right? Was Napoleon responsible for that?
Well, he was one of those. He was one of them. And well, he had ammunition. The Arabs didn't have anything heavy enough.
Oh, I see.
Now, the Battle of Tours about Charlie Martel is that after the conquest of Spain, the Arabs, Berbers, marched into Spain, where they met the French Cid, Charlie Martel, at Tours.
Right.
And the Battle of Tours wasn't much of a battle, really. When they marched to Tours, and by the time they met Charlie Martel, they got news that the Grand Caliph of Islam had died. And they stopped in the middle of the battle to go back to Damascus and elect a new head of the faith. So Charlie Martel won the battle by default.
Okay.
The Muslims stopped fighting to go elect a new head. And when they returned, they consolidated their holding in Spain and gave up the idea of conquering France.
Right. Were they trying to conquer Europe or just France? Or?
Well, they could have conquered all of Europe. All they needed was shoes. Europe wasn't strong enough to take Spain. And so the great victory of Charlie Martel really wasn't that much of a victory. Because the Muslims just changed their mind about the whole thing and just stayed on in Spain.
Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Clarke.
Thank you.
Thank you for the lecture. In regard to Sonny Ali's successor, Muhammad Askia, you mentioned something about the meaning of his name actually literally meaning a throne taker or usurper.
But that was the Askia really was a curse word.
Oh my goodness. Because the reason I asked, because I actually know African Americans who have taken on that name.
It was a curse word.
In what language? So when someone says to me,
the Songhai script of that day.
Songhai script of that day. Okay,
But she meant it as a curse word.
I see.
And he accepted it that way, and he wanted it to be that way. He said, "I accept it. So henceforth, this is the name of my dynasty."
I see.
He accepted it as an act of defiance. He said, "Call me thief, call me stone, call me usurper, call me Askia."
And still stayed in power.
Yes.
Okay. Second question: was it under his reign that this mayor of Timbuktu stayed in office for 50 years?
He was already in office when he came.
I see. He was in office under Sonny Ali then.
Yeah, he was on the office under Sonny. It was under his reign that he begged for relief.
Okay, could you just repeat his name again?
He was Muhammad Nordi of Timbuktu Koi.
Muhammad Nordi.
Muhammad Nordi.
Okay, thank you.
Referred to as Timbuktu Koi.
Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Clarke. It's an honor for me to stand before you to ask a question. I greet you this evening. Thank you. I'm particularly interested in a comment from you on the degradation, so to speak, today of traditional African religion. It is said that it is a lower religion because you're not dealing with celestial beings, but in fact with deities. We deify our ancestors, and therefore the idea of mediumship and religion, pouring of libation, is degraded even among our own people. I just would like you to clarify for me if that is in fact so, in your understanding.
But the African indigenous religion, properly understood, is a high religion. And the deification of the human being is a high thing to do, because African religion touches the totality of life itself, and it has a respect for totality of life, especially the family. And there's nothing lowly about it. And when I went to live in Africa and among the God people of Ghana, and when they explained their religion to me, I had great respect for it. And they are Methodists, but when they get serious, they go to their own African god who lives in a lagoon.
Yes, in the rivers.
In the river. And I respect that.
Thank you.
And I respect the fact that in that custom, when there was the first time there was a death in the family, and I asked how much the funeral cost, and the funeral didn't cost anything, and the widow was taken care of, and all those forces came together. Now, so the Social Security built into the culture. This is a civilization.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
My question is about spirituality and the universal force you spoke about.
Yeah, spirituality versus formal religion.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I feel as if, we have somewhat parted from spirituality, and we no longer know what it is.
But you see, they knew, they didn't call it anything. They didn't departmentalize it, and they didn't build any churches around it. And God was everywhere, and if you wanted to contact God, you contacted the wind, because God was in the wind.
Well, can you briefly describe how one can regain consciousness of the spirit?
No, it was it was a belief in all living things, and man was so spiritual he could pick up a serpent, wrap the serpent around his head, and he was so much at peace he didn't get bitten. I don't know how he got it. If I knew how he got it, I would know how he can regain it.
What hope can we have?
I don't think we are hopeless, but then we're living in a society where we might, in this kind of society, structurally, I don't know whether it is obtainable in this kind of society. I think it is obtainable to a degree, but in this kind of society, that spiritual perfection that we had in this other society may not be possible.
We did say, knowing the facts and our history, that perhaps we would feel as we would regain our confidence and feel perhaps that if we did it once, we could do it again.
But we were not threatened. It ended when we were threatened. We were threatened first from the east. And when we drove away that threat, we had 1,000 years of peace. And the threat came again. And that threat destroyed our peace, then weakened us until the threat came from Europe. And we never knew peace again to this day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My first question is, what is the significance and correlation between the defeat of the Moors in Spain in 1492?
The what now?
The defeat of the Moors in Spain. The defeat of the Moors.
I hear you now. Go ahead.
The importation of slaves to the island of Hispaniola the same year. And the second question is there any truth to the event of the Nicene Conference of Bishops in 324 AD?
No, let's get the first question. The defeat of the Moors in Spain, and what?
The importation of slaves in the island of Hispaniola.
Oh, yeah, good. All right. the defeat of the Moors in Spain, with the defeat of the Moors in Spain, the Spanish went on a revenge rampage. And a lot of the Africans in Spain and in the Mediterranean were enslaved, and this is why many of them, the first slaves in the New World, did not come from Africa. They came from Spain and the Mediterranean.
Were they prisoners of war?
Well, you can say prisoners of war. This is why a lot of the Africans, the first, they came with the Spanish conquistadors. You can say they were prisoners of war.
Okay.
A lot of them were high caliber. A lot of them were technicians, armorers, ammunition makers, wheat farmers with Cortez, armorers with Balboa, road builders with Balboa, and an armorer with Pizarro in Peru, you know. I mean, high caliber technicians. Now the second question.
The second question is there any truth to the event in 324 AD at the Nicene Conference of Bishops? I've read that that was the first actual event where they changed the names of Mary, Joseph, and Jesus from Isis, Osiris, and Horus.
332.
324 AD. Oh, 332?
332.
Oh, okay. I'll take your word for it. Sure.
Yes,
I'm asking you, is there any truth to that?
They changed. Really was Haru.
Okay.
It wasn't even Horus. It was Haru.
It was Haru.
They changed it
from Haru to Horus.
And they changed the story about it wasn't a child in a manger. It was a cave in Ethiopia.
Okay. Okay.
So they whitened up the Christ story.
So that was the first whitewash.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Then they Europeanized it.
Okay. Can you?
Well, they Europeanized the whole Christ story. They dressed it up for Europe.
Did they replace the African bishops with a European bishopry?
Oh yes, then this is why the African writer of the church, St. Augustine, said that when he read the story of the councils, he laughed. And this is in a book called Shadow of the Third Century by Alvin Boyd Kuhn. There's another book by Alvin Boyd Kuhn, who's well worth reading. This is a white man who couldn't even get Weinstein published his book. Shadow of the Third Century. And another book he written called Who is This King of Glory? One of the clearest books ever written about the Christ story.
I'll have to get that one. I have to get that. Thank you very much.
Like my previous brothers and sisters, I'd like to say thanks very much for your lecture. My question is basically on religion. The Bible states that God created man from his own image and likeness. History tells me that the black man was the first man. What I would like to clarify is when did the Caucasian came about?
Well, the Caucasian is an offshoot. The Caucasian is an offshoot. Now, every people on earth have their own creation story. All people have their creation stories.
But it is a fact that the black man is the first man.
That is a fact. That is a fact until you meet someone else who said that they are the first story. Until you meet somebody else. But it's a fact that he is, by all knowledge that we know, archaeologically and otherwise. Now the Adam and Eve story is Jewish folklore.
Yes. So I'm just trying to deduce that if...
It's interesting.
What I'd like, all I would like to sort of clarify in my mind, which has been bothering me for a very long time, is that if we are the first, and God make man in his own image and likeness, therefore God has got to be black.
I don't know whether we want to deal with logic or anthropology or not.
Okay.
Logically, yes.
Thank you, sir.
If we want to deal with logic, the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question is about why the Queen Elizabeth from Spain wrote the letter that you were talking about.
Because someone had propositioned Elizabeth earlier about the slave trade, and she had rejected going into the slave trade. She was now all the way into the trade, and she was seeking allies in other parts of Africa, North Africa, and she wanted the alliance of Il-Mansur. The rumor is that when she died, there was a picture, a painting of Il-Mansur in her bedroom. There's no indication he ever met him, because there's no indication he ever went to England. There was a painting of him in her bedroom. He was an African emperor.
Okay, thank you.
Clarke, I think he wanted you to explain about the letter. That's really what he was interested in.
The letter?
Yes, sir.
The letter, he wrote, he had written her a letter. She had written him a letter. Then he had answered a letter apologizing for not answering her previous letter. And in his letter, he said he had been busy planning the destruction, planning the invasion of Songhai. Then in her answer, she said that if you assist me in the overthrowing of King Antonio of Spain, I will give you the ammunition you need for the job. If you look at Morocco and look at Spain, you can see why she made the proposition. Morocco is next door to Spain. You can jump from Morocco right over into Spain. So he's in a good position to overthrow Spain. And all she needed is some support. Remember, England and Spain were rivals in the slave trade and rivals at sea. And she needed some support in the Mediterranean against the Spanish. And she was trying to solicit his support. And said if she could get his support, she would give him the ammunition he needed to move down south and destroy the Black Kingdom, Songhai. That's why she wrote the letter. And that's what the correspondence was about. She did give him the support. It was those small cannons that she gave him that helped to destroy Songhai.
Dr. Clarke, I enjoyed the lectures you gave. I'd like to you to, as brief as you can, getting to some of the African, particular religion, the African connection with religion in the Spanish-speaking cultures, like in Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, etc., if you can.
African religions?
In its connection to like Catholicism, Pentecostal, Santeria, those kind of things like that.
Well, see, fortunately, the African religions in Puerto Rico and in African religions in Spanish-speaking countries have managed to integrate itself to some extent into Catholicism. or especially in Brazil, they managed to accept some of the African deities and respect some of them. And Catholicism has had less difficulty in coming to grips with African deity than the Protestants and than others. And Catholicism has made a better accommodation to African religions. I mean, the Catholics have made a better accommodation to African religions than Presbyterians and others. And I think it was a little intelligent of them to do that, because by doing that, they have entered less conflict with Africans and managed to tone down the revolutionary fervor. Like in Mexico, the Catholic Church has made an accommodation with the religions of the Indians, and many of the Indians practiced their own religion and went into battle with the medallions, around their necks. And the same thing is true in Haiti, where the Voodoo, which is an African religion, and the Catholicism have not had a clash, because the African could hold on to both of them. And the same thing is true in Brazil, where the Shango and right here in New York City, the Santa Maria religion and Catholicism have not had a clash, because many people who are Catholics belong to both of them.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Dr. Clarke. I enjoyed your lecture. I'd just like to ask one question. In regard to the discrepancy in terms of African history, how does one go about finding the actual facts in terms of history to provide some identity for black youth?
Well, you have to take a simple approach, read some of the basic things first, then digest it for yourself, and then simplify it for them. With my own children, I try to approach it through legends and folklore, and tell them the story of the Golden Stool, the story of Timbuktu, and the story of African heroes, the story of heroic women and kings, and then you get into straight history. But I entice them with the heroic aspects first,
Is there one particular book that you can find with that information in it?
Unfortunately, no. No. I think John Jackson's work is pretty good, but it gets a little stiff at times. I think J.C. DeGraff Johnson's African Glory is probably simplified, and it reads well. It's out again. It's in paperback. It's at the Liberation Bookstore, and I've done a new introduction to the book. The Black Classics Press have gotten it out again.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Brothers and sisters, a great man has spoken some powerful pieces, and